Okay, welcome to the Bill Cartwright Show featuring Steve Cohen. Our guest today is a USF alum, uh, 1995, 1999 USF player. Played on as a member of the 98 NCAA championship team. Booker Harris. Booker Harris, I'm pleased to have you on.
Hey, it's a pleasure to be on here with you, Bill and Steve today. It's been quite quite the journey for me from my days at the Hilltop, and then actually remembering my first collegiate game when I was in fifth grade was going to a USF, I think USF Pepperdine game.
Wow. Wow. So you got some roots. Now, wait a minute. Now, you grew up in San Francisco, is that right?
Yeah, you grew up in San Francisco, like West Portal, Ingleside, Terrace area.
Yeah. So you were nice and close. Now, I want to get this right. Now, was your dad a basketball coach?
Yes, my dad was a basketball coach. I wound up playing for him for 2 years in high school. My brother was also on the same team when I was a senior and he was a freshman, and he also himself played at USF under Philip Matthews.
So uh, that doesn't mean you got the ball a lot, did it? Late in the
Oh,
game?
I did, definitely did. So that's one thing I can't complain about. I mean, obviously there was a lot of time spent in the gym, but it did pay off when there was that trust. So I got my more than my share of field goal attempts up. You can say that. So people still probably joke about it, like how much senior year I had that green light, and I definitely put my foot on the gas for that.
Now, let me ask you now, in your journey to find a college, how did you get to USF?
You know what? For me, I found out I was one of those kids who I wasn't necessarily ready to go away from home or anything like that. And plus, it was nice to have being a hometown kid, so I can go and have a meal at home, 10 minutes away. Mom and dad could come to all the home games, and then also just the tradition of the university and the Jesuit education I was going to receive, and then kind of like not being overwhelmed with class size. So there was a lot of perks that kind of went well for me, and kind of being around a smaller atmosphere where I can get attention, in the classroom, and have connections with people, and not necessarily be a number in a large crowd.
So who recruited you when you went to school there? Who was one of the first coaches you talked to?
One of the first coaches I had an interaction with John Peterson at the time, and the transition was, I was looking at the university to go in there and actually um, go and walk on, and then Gravelli that summer or right before I remember graduation in high school, like the transition happened where Gravelli was retiring, and then Coach Matthews had just been hired. So it was one of those things where the history of the school, and then like being close to home, um, didn't change anything in my mind of where I wanted to be, and spend my time playing basketball, and getting my degree ultimately at the end of the day.
So, what was your first impressions when you got to campus? So you got to campus, and now you're meeting your team and your coach. What was your first impression?
Getting on campus, it was one of those things where I still was definitely eyes and deer in the headlights, just because still it had been small, but the high school I went to wasn't wasn't large itself at the time. It was Bridgemont College Prep, and it was actually over in like the Excelsior Mission part of the city, and it was stepping onto a college campus. It was one of those things where you're like, wow, this is different because you only have class like 2 times a week. I have to get my behind out of bed on my own.
Yeah.
I have to figure out time management of, A, working on my game, being in shape, and B, at the same time, not get caught up in all the excitement and all the fun times that you have, hanging out with people, hanging out in the dorms, living in the city and being so close, walking distance down to like Haight Ashbury and the good eats over there on Gary Street and all that. So there was a lot of maturation process that was needed to be, I guess, mentored and nurtured. But I'd like to think, a couple great upperclassmen guys, had always been good to me, like Gerald Walker, Booker Washington, Johnny Dugan, MJ Nodillo, guys like that. Respected that I was eager in my work ethic more than anything. They're respected, and those guys just had a lot of great, hearts and funny moments, and kind of circle around and made you feel welcomed and warm. And that could be said through anybody in the department while you were walking through, maybe to get advised, the other teams. It was one of those things where, on that campus and on the hilltop, you just know it's like a family atmosphere. And that's one of the things that sticks with me, that in relationships. And it's funny because you probably brought up the point too, Bill, like even when you get together with your old teammates and everything, the jokes don't stop, and it's like you haven't missed a beat. It's like
Oh,
you're transported back into time, although our bodies don't move like it.
yeah, that's true. Yeah, no, you're definitely right, because when you talk to your old teammates, matter of fact, I talked to a couple of them yesterday.
Nice.
It's the same conversation. It's just like it had to stop. So you mentioned a guy that we know really well. I want you to tell people what Phil Matthews' practices were like. Were they a bit challenging? Now we already know that question, but go ahead.
But no, it was a lot of a lot of a lot of hard work. It was one of those things where you take from it, you realize there's a lot more in you, even when you think you're tired after you ran a couple championship runs. Like the intensity and the pace is what sticks out to me. Um, and then just the intensity, and like our motto was, we play hard. And it's one of those things where every time you stepped on the court in between those lines, like you had to find that gear and get motivated. And he did help with the motivation to play hard. Don't forget about that part. But there's some days where you think in your mind, you're like, oh, I don't have it, I can't do it. But uh, you know, being the way he was, and kind of like a pit bull, when he walked in between those lines, um, it was something that was, it was the expectation. You weren't going to um, cruise control. You weren't going to, have a dialogue about, can we do this, or this is too much. It was one of those things that was understood. And the great thing about it, like as soon as he walked at the gym, like he'd be whistling, crackling jokes, and almost kind of like a completely different character. It just goes to show you, that you can be intense and you can be a fierce competitor when you're in between those lines. And I think that's kind of the things that our team, the '98 tournament team, what we fed off of, and we were that way.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I did have one of those kind of coaches in high school. And it's something until you're really a part of, you really don't understand, because your focus, as soon as you walk on the floor, it's really intense, and you better be ready to practice. You better be ready to go 100%. Your effort has got to be off the charts. So And it's funny because I don't know if you realize this, but I did watch a couple of your practices.
I do. I do remember that. So, and I think that was one of the other cool highlights of the part, whether we followed or before, because I remember teams would roll in to play the Warriors, but it would be very, very common for like whoever was in town to practice at USF on the
Yeah.
game day and have their shoot around or something like that. So I do remember walking the high rafters and then peeking down or peeking my head in and having Bob Duran be like, "Hey Harris, come here. Guess who's in town today?" And so go and peek in.
That was great stuff. Um, who do you remember as being some of your toughest opponents that season?
That season, I remember the WCC tournament at Toso Pavilion. Uh, a close game of Santa Clara came down to the wire. Uh, Gonzaga was good. They had Matt Santangelo,
Uh,
uh, Richie Fromm, guys like that. Pepperdine had, I think Jelani Gardner had transferred there. Um, Dion Holden from University of Portland. It just seemed like every night there was a team that could beat you. I remember USD, the teams back then playing up in the Sports Center with like Lamont Smith, uh, Fizdale when he was there. Those guys, like just the amount of talent that there was night in and night out. But some of the best. You can't forget about Steve Nash, who was there at Santa Clara. He
yeah.
was really, really good. So I remember those battles even before get there watching between him and Gerald Walker.
Now, what did you feel like you learned basketball wise that really helped you? What was the difference between your game your freshman year and your senior year? Did you
I think just your IQ, and that's one of the things. In high school, watching film, you usually just watched your highlights, but in college, is one of those things you were able, and it was definitely laid out and put in front of your face. When you didn't close out, when you weren't in a stance, where you were, when you were hugging a man, and then not to mention just physically how your body changes. Um, I remember the joke was I went from being diet book to like swole book because I wanted putting on going from like 170, and by the time I was senior it was probably like 187, and it was good muscle and healthy weight. Don't get me wrong, I still had my mom's great home cooking of macaroni and cheese, collard greens, sweet potatoes, and everything like that, but uh, the muscle and just being more physically aware of what you could do. And it's one of those things, now as a coach, it's funny because when you have young people come in and you recruit them, you're like, you usually tell them like, my money is on, you know, 21, 22-year-old Bill instead of 18, 17-year-old Bill. Although both in your cases, both those guys were pretty good and both legends in Sacramento all the way down to the city.
Hey, talk about how did you keep a balance because you were a good student when you were in school. How did you keep that balance of being an athlete and a student?
You know what? It was one of those things where it was for me. It was um, time management. Like it was being diligent, and then some of the caveat and carrots was like if your if your GPA was high enough. Um, and my only claim to fame on that team is being all academic team, which means I was uh,
Well, that's
I,
still that's still a
I
pretty good claim.
true, but like it's one of those days. Pretty much, I was trying to be productive at something. As far as making sure in the morning I had a routine because we had practice in the afternoon, but just being diligent and saying no to some things at sometimes, which is difficult. And what the academic support that we had there was second to none. So it kind of gave me a leg up to be able to stay organized, and then also being so close to home. I also had uh, that peer pressure, that pressure from my mom and dad. So there was one of those things where they didn't want me going to school just to get by. So it was one of those things where I knew during the summer I still had to walk through their house and make sure I wasn't goofing off too much, but still enjoying life.
So it's your senior year. You're leaving school. Um, you're very successful. You played on some really good teams. You've done well academically. So what are you thinking as you're leaving school? Did you feel like you were prepared for your next step to know what you wanted to do?
You know what? Did feel prepared. I think the biggest part and biggest fear when you know you're not going to be playing in the NBA or anything like that, or professional, is like, what will I be doing next? Um, but from my professors and teachers and everything like that, I felt like I was equipped, in a sense, to step out and go down whatever avenue I was going to choose, because I had been studying business, and was at the McLaren School of Business. So I felt comfortable and definitely confident in my ability to step into uh, quote unquote the business world, or a 9 to 5 or anything like that. Um, but in that spring when you enjoy not necessarily having to go to spring workouts, and you're hanging out in the quad, there's a little more sun.
Yeah, that's
You go
nice.
right. You're going down to O'Shea's a little more often on Thursday nights to say hi to the crew and everybody, everybody like that. I think, like I said, the biggest thing was like, what's next on the horizon? Like, what do you do? And for me, it was one of those things where I wasn't sure how much I wanted to be away from the game, because by senior year, you know, being the older voice on the team, there's a lot of guys that had respect for me, and even though uh, my my numbers or accolades wasn't there. Like if I had mentioned something on the sideline, like, "Oh, hey, ball fake that and then step through," and so you're able to deliver it to the post, those guys would be like, "Oh yeah, I see what you're saying," or slap me on the butt and say like, oh, "Okay, appreciate that." So that kind of put the itch of coaching or thinking about coaching kind of in the back of my mind at the time.
Interesting. So how did you end up at Sonoma State?
I was looking at grad programs, who kind of was still in the Bay Area, because I wasn't sure how far I wanted to get away from home. Once again, as you can tell, I'm exciting, and exciting how close I like being towards home. But they also had a business program, master's in business program, and it was in the area of Sonoma County, which was close to like hospitality and beverages and wine industry and things like that. So it was one of those things where it was a good quick drive, not too far from home, about mm, 40 45 50 minutes away,
Yeah.
just hit north, but like still close enough to kind of be close by. Um, and the area was actually, um, the more when I went up there to look at the program and visit the school, and take in like the green trees and being so close to all those vineyards, kind of stuck out to me.
So after you left there, um, is that correct? You ended up at Long Beach.
Yeah,
How in the
so
world did that happen? Now, finally, you left home.
I did I did leave home. It was funny because the story was, I when you're a player, you wind up working a lot of the camps for your program that they put on during the summer. Um, and I was on that time on the camp circuit, and it was a huge thing for young guys at that time who thought about coaching or was around coaching. They would go work camps up and down the state, everywhere you name it. And so I went down to go visit um, Larry Reynolds, who was an assistant for Phil Matthews when I was playing there, and he
Right.
he had just got the Long Beach State job, and I went down there, I think the week before 4th of July or something, to visit and say hi. And plus, I had family in Long Beach, and I uh, went and stopped by and hung out with him and Bill Carr, uh, who was the associate head coach at Long Beach State, and Bill had also been, an assistant for Lane, who was an assistant for
Right.
Phil, uh, also. And so I wound up going down there, and they had mentioned or asked what I was doing at the time. I was at grad school at Sonoma State and kind of like a graduate student there. And one of those things where they're like, we can't pay you. I can give you an opportunity uh, to to come down and work here. And it's one of those things where, I thought about it, and I decided to go for it. And part of the reason why is because like I had a cousin and an aunt right down the street from that school too. So once again, the comforts of home. So
I see. So how? So what'd you learn when you were there in Long Beach? What'd you learn?
wow, I think that was more than anything for me, the crash course of being a college coach. Because, as the player, you walk, roll in the film, you're like, oh man, so here goes, here goes the film session that we're in. But I got to learn all the details that go on behind it, the road trip planning, uh, the staff meetings where you put together what you're going to work on that day, the motion offense, your defense, um, player development, um, and then also just kind of like the whole caveat of NCAA, and that was like one of the first things about taking a test for compliance and everything like that that goes into
Wow.
it. I
Wow. So was recruiting a big part of that as well?
For the position I was in to start with, it wasn't, but the nice thing about it back then, being in Long Beach in that area, um, being the strength and conditioning coach, and uh, there was a lot of local high schools around. So on my own, I could wander out or go watch a game, and that was close. And like you said, for being in that position, when kids did get to campus, it was one of those things where I did a lot of the tours and kind of like shuttled them around campus or took them to their hotels. So I got involved with that whole aspect of recruiting. So as far as the hosting and everything like that. So I didn't quite get my chance to evaluate until I went to Cal State San Bernardino as an assistant, and then I was on one of those roles that got you um, out in recruiting, and as well as game 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 responsibilities and everything that goes with that as far as being an assistant coach. But Long Beach was like one of the early days where I got my foot in the door.
Wow. So from that led you to going out of the state, and you ended up going to Denver.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow, finally out of the state at least.
It was. Well, it took a while. So, but before I went out of the state to Denver, there was a stop at University of San Diego, and I was a part of staff that first year with Bill Greer, um, and it was actually the year we won it. We were hosting at the Jenny Craig Pavilion,
Wow.
um, and it's an unreal kind of 3 game stretch. Like we came back to beat St. Mary's, who was ranked, Gonzaga, who was ranked. True was all on our home floor, and then we beat University of Connecticut in the first round. Um, and then at that time, I was in a director of ops spot, and on staff with once again Bill Carr, and then I got a phone call from another buddy who was at, I forget at the time, he might have been at like Northern Arizona or something like that, and they mentioned the opportunity in Colorado uh, to kind of get my feet um, wet as far as being a higher assistant, as far as responsibilities and scouting and game planning and recruiting. So I it took some real long pondering to leave, the 75 degrees and ocean breeze to head down over to Colorado. But luckily, when I went to visit on my interview, I met a lot of great people. I actually met Joan McDermott, who
Interesting.
yeah, who was the athletic director there at Metro State at the time. And we had a great connection, being both from San Francisco and attending USF. And then she was also a very poignant part, as far as like, hey, this may not be, quote unquote, the right move, but it's a pretty good move. And I think it'll help you further your career. And so I sucked it up and, like I said, moved out there in the fall of 2009. And, kind of was like, oh, it's not so bad. And then early October, the first snowstorm came. First time living out of state.
Yeah.
I had like
You found out.
a Honda Accord, and came out, and my car was covered in snow. I had no, no scraper or anything like that. Had a meltdown on the street, but luckily there was some nice mother who stopped in her station wagon and helped me out. She literally took out her scraper and said, "Hey, you might want to go to Big Lots and pick up one of these." But she was able to scrape the snow off my car, and I turned on my car and headed straight there to pick up my first snow scraper.
So what did you feel like when you learned at Metropolitan State?
Uh, at Metro State is one of those things I learned, working for two great guys there, Brandon Hayes and Derek Clark, who were most recently at Loyola Marymount. But I learned, kind of the thing that was thrown on my plate by both of those guys were, what would you do if you were running the program? So it kind of put me in a different mindset about like thinking of a whole organization, like your thought process there on recruiting, on practice planning, on knowing when guys are tired or when to plan an off day, and then also having Joan around there too. Like she was very incremental and showing me kind of like the administrative side about what goes into decisions on the conference level, the university level, what your president is thinking, everything like that. So that kind of once again opened my eyes to a different aspect of what I had never even thought or really imagined as, when you're a player and your most important thing as a player is like playing time, minutes, and
Right.
enjoying the perks that everything that's set out for you, whether it's pregame meals, road trips, and having your keys ready at checkout. So it was on that coaching side, like all the other stuff that goes into um, what you see, not just on TV, but the other major parts of it, the behind the scenes stuff.
So you felt like it gave you a bigger vision of what coaching's all about, having your own system. What would you do? Um, so when did you feel like you were ready to be a head coach?
You know what? And you, yeah, you might have a better view of this than I do because you do have kids. It was one of those things where I wasn't sure if I was ready, but I had, a great circle of friends and other coaches that said, it's prepared. And they kind of mentioned it to being to the likes of like parenthood. Like when you have your first child, it's kind of, well, here you are. And like, you're like, well, I don't know if I'm ready to be this. And it's like, ready or not, here you go. Here, no instructions. It's all yours. Try taking care of this brand new baby that you got. So for me, it was one of those things where I knew each university that I worked at was a little bit different. Um, and I had an idea in my mind of what I thought things were going to look like. So I was prepared in that fact, but I don't know necessarily if it was one of those things where I finally sat down when I took the offer to be head coach. I'm like, okay, I'm ready. It's going to be boom, boom, boom.
So when you had an opportunity to become the head coach of Dominican, University. What were you thinking? What were you thinking going into that interview? What did you,
uh,
or better yet, I guess, what did you think was going to put you over the top and separate you from everybody else?
oh my goodness, I had that is a great question, and a question, I'll be hilariously transparent about. Like, I had no idea. It was one of those things where it's like, well, maybe if enough people say no, or being a 33-year-old at the time, not having, you know, called a timeout except in a scrimmage or anything like that. I had no idea. I knew one thing. I was from the Bay Area. Like, the university is 14 miles from where I grew up in San Francisco. And B, I felt I had done a really good job in my career as far as connections and how I treated people on campuses and everything like that. And then lastly, having been at all these places, kind of have built up like a recruiting network. So I felt no matter whose house I walked into, whether the kid was from San Francisco or whether the kid was from like Auburn, Alabama, or something like that. Like, I'd had some way to connect with that recruit. So that was one of the things that I was probably the most confident about than anything else. But the other part, like as far as the interview, like how I was answering questions, I had put together like a booklet or whatever about my plan or this and that, and I had like no idea.
So tell us about your first year there as a head coach.
Oh
You
man.
you are now the man. So it's you got to get an assistant coach. You got to get players. What was your first year like?
Yeah, it was a whirlwind. Like, coming in, because everything you had mentioned, like recruiting class. Like, I think that year I brought in 7 guys, and of course I got the job like in May. Like, finals or graduation had just happened. I had 7 guys to recruit. I was searching for an assistant I was comfortable with, and at the time, I wound up picking uh, my guy, Rich Mendoza, a guy who had not worked with, but we had kind of been along the same path. We had been at like Long Beach State basketball camps working. He was at UC Irvine, working for uh, their basketball program, and we had gone head to head on the recruiting trails a lot, where we used to see each other in gyms and like, oh, what are you here? What are you here? Who are you here watching? Um, so it was one of those things for me. That first year, it was like, okay, I think I have this plan on what I want to do, on what I want to run, and then everyone gets back to campus, and then I'm like, this this idea we won't be running and pressing like the Dandy Dons or like UNLV. It's going to have to be a little more uh, controlled and figure out what we can become good at. So I think that was the most eye opening thing, having an idea of like, oh, I'd be able to do this and that, and then having to kind of reevaluate it and pivot real quickly once you realize that that might not be conducive for your team. And not to mention, the whole fact of when you're on the airport or on trips, and people, at the time it was a compliment because I hadn't been coaching long, so I hadn't aged. So they're like, "Oh, get out of here! You're the head coach. You look so young."
Can you talk about some of the challenges you have? Because like what type of player are you looking for? Um, because I want to be clear about it's not easy to coach at Dominican. It's not like you're going to go to UCLA or SC or Arizona. And also, um, how many scholarships do you have? And also, academically, how hard is it to get these kids in school?
Right. We all of those things you had mentioned, like it is definitely have its challenges. I mean, because at the Division 2 level where I'm at, it's a little bit different from Division 1, where you have 13 full scholarships. The maximum um, any institution could have is 9.9 or 10 at the Division 2 level. Um, but currently at my university, we're not fully funded, so we're not necessarily at the same level as some of those other schools in the conferences. Plus the academic um, things that are thrown in. So one thing I do look for is a skill, as far as being able to pass, shoot. So some type of skill set. I like guys that can do a lot of things as far as being able to pass, set somebody up, think the game, and then don't get me wrong. Like I also like athleticism and length and an ability to play fast in transition. With where I'm at right now, it's one of those things. Like you mentioned, it's not like a UCLA or Arizona. However, if any of those guys want to transfer down, I'd gladly take gladly take them. I'd be a real even better coach than what I am now. So it's one of those things you when you go out and recruit and look, you kind of have to kind of see where they're at and see where you think you can take them as far as the ceiling. It's, I guess, in a sense, finding hidden gems, and then also the size is the difference. As far as Division 1, like there might be a nice 6'3.5", 6'4" point guard who can do X, Y, and Z. And then the thing about a lot of times at the Division 2 level, that guy won't. He'll be about 4 inches shorter than what the than that other guy. But I mean, they'll be similar as far as the speed, their skill set, the way they shoot it. It's just the whole size at the positions are a little bit different, and especially when you get to the big men, like if it's 6'8", 6'9", 6'10", at the Division 1 level, those guys, or have the body or the athletic ability to jump out of the gym or something. But I might get a 6'10" kid who's more like a project, or like a Bambi, somebody who needs to get in the weight room a little bit more and kind of be worked with diligently on their footwork in getting a skill set.
Right. Well, I'm a big believer in that anyway. Hey, let me ask you a quick question. What do you think about analytics? Do you use a lot of analytics in your uh, for for practice, for play? Do you use that a
Um,
lot?
Not well. That's a tricky question. Yes and no. A, because I don't have as much big of a staff. So if maybe I had a bigger staff, I'd probably use a little bit more of it. But I do like to stat things as far as in practice and percentages. But for me, I do use that. But there's a lot of things, when you're day in and day out with somebody in the gym, you can tell like, oh, hey, he's a good player. Um, like night in, night out. There's not much analytics when I know Bill Cartwright's dropping 25 points on me and grabbing 9.9, 10, 12 rebounds a night. That's all the analytics you need when it comes to that bottom line. And there's some eye stuff, like you said, that you see day in and day out. Um, but the analytics nowadays, the way teams are using it, I think it does serve a purpose, especially for scout tendencies, um, on what a team might be doing and what they're looking to do, and how you can take that away. Um, so I am a fan of it and a proponent of it, but like I said, at my level, just because I don't have the manpower that you need to do all that stuff, um, what I do with that is like on a much smaller and minimal scale.
Tell me about one of the bigger challenges you have right now with COVID going on for our players. I know that so many guys here, like at USF, they're in a bubble. They can go nowhere. They can only be around their teammates. So talk about that a little bit and the challenges you're facing.
Yeah, similar with us. Like, and for us, like we're still at the time of this podcast. We're still in pods as far as the mini families. So once we get to testing multiple times a week, because right now we're on one time a week, and it's funny because we do have our test this afternoon as a team. Is a trying to trust and know that your kids are making wise decisions and being socially responsible, especially in college, where the thing is to hang out with your crew
Of course.
and boys. And then because we're broken up in pods, like the connection, like the guys that are in the certain pods or families, um, they're becoming creating more synergy and having more team chemistry than necessarily with a couple other their teammates. So that's been the tough part too. And then, like you said, getting in the gym. Luckily, like I said, for us, it's been one of those things. The past 6-7 weeks, like we've been able to get back in, but having those young people get that routine back in between their online classes of getting in the gym, so they're able to work on their skill set. Because it was one of those things where, ooh, that first couple workouts, like shooting drills, it sounded like we were, at a firing range or something like that, like hunting or something, like the way some of those shots were coming off the rim and stuff. It was it was one of those things where we had to remind them, like, hey, it's been a while, a different routine. And I know a lot of you guys don't like to go out and take it back to the old school where you play on blacktop and concrete and shoot on double rims or anything like that. But now's the time that you're back in the gym to take advantage of that. So with this whole pandemic, that's probably been the hardest thing, but the thing about it, with it, on the flip side, the opportunity is they do have a chance, to play a sport and have some type of normalcy to help with the routine.
Let's talk about your future. I mean, are you content, or could there be a possibility of you taking another job? I know it's a tough question because in my journey, it's really interesting because I never really looked for a job, and I ended up really coaching about six different teams. So, would you be open to um, take another job?
Wow, with you as my PR guy, um, the quote I loved it that I use and I love to hear is like, make where you're at your current dream job, and that's kind of like um, my mantra, right now with that. But it's one of those things. I do know um, things happen for a reason, and timing usually is unexpected, like you said, Bill. So it was one of those things for me where, I do love where I'm at, enjoy it, and I don't take for granted the fact that being a head coach for going on season number 10 is like an unreal blessing, and one of those things that are rare.
Yeah,
Um,
that's a great run.
yeah, but if there was one of those scenario situations where Steve Kerr or Bill Cartwright called me and offered me something, I definitely would have to explore that option. And it's one of those things also. I hope, big picture wise, that what I'm doing, maybe not necessarily um, isn't for like all the glitz and the glamour. It's for the relationships that you have with young people who mature and wind up commencing and becoming real good people in society and things like that. But like I said, for now, I'm happy where I'm at. But you never know what'll change, because I'm sure there's plenty of other guys who that they'd be at one location for life and then another opportunity popped up. So I am aware that that is something that definitely could happen too.
Steve?
No, I like that answer, Booker. Right? I mean, wherever you are should be the place to be, and you have to bloom where you're planted, and but not limit yourself. And you know this better than I do. I mean, I thought your journey was really interesting, and um, I've heard you talk about not being an exceptional player relatively. How do you command the respect of your players?
I think it's one of those things with it's sweat equity. And even now with current players now, a lot of them don't get caught up in what you did in the past. It's one of those things where like what how can you help me get to where I want to be? How will you treat me? How will our relationship be? um, and explaining, why why you care for them, why you want them to succeed, more than anything. And like you said, with these softball questions, like I said, at first I thought, you know, that's true, man. Like I went to USF, I for sure wasn't Bill Russell or Bill Cartwright. So what can I offer to them? But I think what they noticed is like once you realize that you not only empathy, but you can sympathize with what they're going through because you were in that position. Um, and it might be a little bit different just because, like I said, I wasn't the guy, you know, scoring 10 points a game or putting up all the numbers. So I do know your frustration, or I do know how it feels to be a great teammate, or when you're on the court to take advantage of the time that you're there. Or if you're on the bench, how to respond to that, how to be a great teammate, how to mentor somebody as a senior who may not be playing minutes, but talking to freshmen and sophomores that are, and helping them, become better players that year.
And I imagine where you are, these players aren't thinking the NBA. Maybe the rare exception might play overseas, but what other careers could one have in basketball outside of playing at a very high level, right? I'm sure you're a great role model for those people, you know.
No, I appreciate that, Steve. Like I said, and it's true. Like, which is crazy. Like you said, it's a lot of those guys know the ball's going to stop bouncing. But one of the things that I've been proud of is not only just because I currently have, I think, 7 guys who played overseas and are still playing Philippines. Yeah, which is from a small Division 2. Even one guy got drafted in the G League by the Knicks. Knicks team uh, is telling them to kind of be where your feet are. Like what's important in that moment. And like you said, the other biggest thing is when you get a call back from one of your players who's pediatrician, like at Oakland Kaiser, and you had to remind him during a halftime when he was freaking out and yelling at the point guard. It's like, hey, you're going to be a surgeon and operating on kids, like big picture here. And then having them come back and say thank you. They said it was funny because he said like the 21-year-old Connor has some choice words for you, but the 27-year-old thanks you a little bit for what you put me through.
That's amazing. No, congratulations on all your success and for knowing Bill.
Well,
That's also a big deal.
So, no, it's like I said, it was awesome. Like I think the best story is Bill's spoken at our tip-off dinner a couple years ago, but I met him through USF's tip-off event that they had, and it was one of those things where I got a call from Bill, and he asked me to be at his table, and I was like, "What in the world?" I was like, "Bill Cartwright, who I grew up watching, and this like that," and it's one of those things where he was really genuine and like I said, didn't know me at the time, but took me under his wing for being just a part of the Dons basketball family, and it's kind of grown. So it's been one of those things where he's come watch my teams play and talk to our guys, and like I said, I've been able to go to his office over there pre-quarantine, pre-COVID, and take notes from him about his coaching journey, in the NBA and overseas, and kind of steal some insights from him too. So.
Yeah, well, let's hope some of that works. Hey, what's funny is that when I talked to your team, you remember what you were telling me? He says, "Okay, you got about like 20 minutes." So I'm like, "Okay, I got 20 minutes," and then I kind of looked up and looked around, and it was like, this is like 50 minutes have gone by, or maybe an hour. Holy smokes! I gotta stop.
So
and that was fun. That was a fun day.
So see, you didn't set the bar so high. I was like, okay, he's gonna be like this, and then you wound up carrying the crowd with all your stories from the NBA days, and you had a lot of people on the edge of their seats. So
yeah, actually, your players. I brought one of them up, and they were terrific. They carried it. But it was awesome. It was fun.
I was going to ask, how are the Chili Penguins looking this year?
You know what? This year, Surprisingly, I like where we're at, like the maturity, because now all those guys Bill brought up and talked with, they were like freshmen or sophomores. I want to say, I think they might have been sophomores. So now it's amazing to see how their bodies have changed as far as wider shoulders in the weight room, and the way they communicate and talk to each other, um, with this senior group. So I like where we're at, like, and I think we'll wind up surprising a lot of people. Um, and then, like I said, with that being said, the whole thing is you play the games for a reason. So when we're able to lace them up and compete, that'll be the first test.
Nice. Well, Booker, it's been great. I really appreciate your time. And what's really interesting for me, and Steve knows this, what's really important to me is not because a lot of people really get enamored by money. They get enamored by how many Twitter hits you have. I've got 2 million of them. And I think the biggest thing to me is that I admire character. I've always admired that in you and how you carry yourself. So, um, it's really important. That's what makes you a great leader. I appreciate our time together, and good luck this season. Win a lot of games, and hopefully, I don't know. Hopefully, maybe I'll be able to come and watch it a couple. Who knows?
Yeah, hopefully that'll be we'll be in a lower tier. But like I said, it's been a pleasure, Steve and Bill being on this. And like I said, that means a lot coming from you, Bill, because I would have never thought in my wildest dreams that A, I would have met you, and B, that you'd be coming to some of our games sometimes and everything like that. So I guess, kind of what I learned as a child from my parents, they knew what they were talking about. So they're right. All that stuff still does get noticed.
It does. I remember you got the ace in the hole. You are a Don.
That's more than
We are
me.
connected.
We are Dons, yes.
Guys, thank you so much.